Have you ever read something that didn't just, tell you history, but actually made you feel it? Something that sort of reached through the pages and turned facts into a really personal, kind of urgent experience. Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your source material and really dig into it, unearthing the most important insights and sometimes surprising facts. Today we're diving into a really profound work. Excerpts from We Were Never Meant to Beg for Light. It's a collection of poems, but it's described as, well, much more than just poetry.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? The way this book works. It really serves as this powerful testament to survival, resistance, and just the unbreakable spirit of Black history and identity. Our mission for you today, really, is to explore how this collection, and specifically through one really striking poem, it forces us to reckon with American ideals versus, well, the historical realities.
Right, so we'll unpack why this book exists, because, as the source says, certain stories and voices just must be heard, and ancestors need to be profoundly honored. We'll look at how poetry becomes this kind of undeniable bridge to history. Then we'll zoom in on section 3, which is titled, America, Can You Hear Us? White Supremacy, Silence, and the Weight of Injustice.
A powerful title in itself.
Definitely. And within that section, we're going to tackle a truly bold and powerful poem, one that actually reclaims a familiar national hymn. And in doing so, it forces a confrontation with these deep contradictions right at the foundation of the United States. So, okay, let's start with that core purpose. Our source material describes we were never meant to beg for light as a profound testament, not just to poetry itself, but to survival, resistance, and this undeniable spirit of Black history and identity. It sets a really clear intention right from the get-go.
It absolutely does. The author's very explicit. This book exists because these stories, these voices must be heard, period. And ancestors must be honored. It's framed as a direct challenge, really, to centuries of attempts to silence these narratives, erase truths, distort the facts, even steal names.
Wow.
Yeah, and the book asserts, quite defiantly, I think, we are still here. Our voices carry, our stories endure, our light refuses to be dimmed. It's really positioned as an act of reclaiming history.
And you really feel that deep personal commitment woven into every line. The poems themselves, they're described as a labor of love, crafted with such deep intention, shaped by this desire to honor the past, illuminate the present, and inspire the future. They're rooted in, as the text says, pain and joy, loss and triumph, erasure and remembrance. It honestly feels like every single word is meant as a tribute to those who've been forgotten.
And what's really remarkable, I think, is how this collection uses poetry specifically as the mechanism to do that. It's not just, creative expression for its own sake. It's about making history something you can actually connect with tangibly, something that kind of bypasses just the intellectual understanding.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit then.
Yeah.
How does the author describe poetry doing something fundamentally different than, say, a standard history book?
Well, the author uses this phrase, describing poetry as more than an art form. It is a bridge. Think about it like this. A poem can allow you to sort of step inside moments that maybe you've only read about in a textbook, right?
Right.
It lets you feel the weight of injustice, maybe the fire of revolution, or even just the tenderness of survival. It kind of collapses that distance between the past and the present.
That's a really powerful distinction. So it's less about just memorizing a collection of facts and more like an invitation to actually experience history, to connect with those who came before us in ways that, traditional textbooks often can't quite capture. It's about that direct emotional engagement, which really transforms how we understand things.
Exactly. It moves beyond just information into immersion. And that's pretty critical, I think, for truly reckoning with difficult truths.
So if poetry is this bridge to history, where does this collection ultimately take us? It definitely doesn't shy away from uncomfortable truths, does it? Especially in section 3, which has that incredibly powerful title, America, Can You Hear Us? White Supremacy, Silence, and the Weight of Injustice. I mean, the title alone signals how direct this work is.
Oh, absolutely. This section, as the source material lays out, it directly confronts the systemic forces that continue to oppress and marginalize Black lives. And crucially, it holds up a mirror to the complicity of silence itself. It frames the whole discussion around a fundamental contradiction.
Because as we all know, America has long prided itself on these ideals, freedoms, democracy, justice for all. But as the book really points out, beneath those proclamations lies this undeniable truth. These promises have never, ever been equitably extended to everyone.
Right.
And scholars like Ibram X. Kendi and Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz, who are referenced in the source, they've really illuminated how the very foundations of this nation were built on Well, the forced labor of enslaved Africans, the genocide of indigenous peoples, and this racial hierarchy designed explicitly to uphold whiteness as the standard of power.
And what's profound here, according to the source, is the assertion that challenging white supremacy means challenging America's very self-image. And for centuries, the nation has resisted that confrontation. This section argues that ignoring this historical reality just perpetuates the ongoing weight of injustice. It makes the silence itself a form of complicity, you know?
And nowhere is that confrontation clearer, perhaps, than in the very first poem of this section, a poem titled My Country is a V. That's such a bold move, isn't it? Reclaiming such a familiar national hymn.
It absolutely is a very bold reclamation. This poem goes right at the contradiction between those American ideals and the actual lived reality of Black Americans. I mean, the original song celebrates liberty and patriotism, right? But this poem, it exposes the exclusions that have shaped the nation from the very beginning. That anthem of freedom, it argues, rings hollow when millions have been denied its promise, their contributions erased, their struggles just ignored. This poem refuses to let those voices stay buried.
It seems to acknowledge the deep scars of history, but at the same time, it asserts this undeniable claim to America, not as outsiders, but as the people who literally built it with sweat, blood, and resilience. It's not about rejecting America, as the source notes. It's more about forcing America to reckon with its own truths.
Exactly. And the poem really drives this home with lines that are, well, they're both poignant and pretty accusatory. They demand your attention.
You hear it immediately in those opening lines, such a stark contrast to the original song. Of stolen destiny, raised on backs and bent down knees, where freedom rings, just not for me. It sets the tone right away.
It really does.
And the poem continues laying bare that hypocrisy. Sweet land of liberty, they sing, yet bind my hands, strip my wings.
And it speaks directly to the fundamental lies underpinning the national story. This land of dreams is paved in lies, its stars dimmed by muffled cries. The source material explains this further, pointing out that the land proclaiming liberty was built on enslaved backs, the flag waving in triumph, soaked in the blood of those who fought for rights they were never actually granted.
It's heavy stuff. The poem then goes on. For some, the feast is laid with care. For others, bones are left laid bare. And then there's that truly striking line. You preach of unity bold and free, yet choke on Black humanity. It feels like this insistence, this demand, that the full story has to be told, that the past can't just be rewritten for comfort, but needs to be faced with, well, honesty and accountability.
Yes. Yet, and this is important, despite this whole history of injustice, the poem ultimately asserts this unwavering spirit, a spirit of resistance and hope. It declares, yet still we rise steadfast, unbroken, with fire-lit eyes and truths outspoken.
That's powerful. And then there's this statement of enduring presence, a demand for justice. We claim this ground, our rightful place, not in whispers, but face to face. The poem closes with both a plea and a declaration, doesn't it? My country, hear my plea, unveil the past, let justice be. For all who dream, for all who see, this land is ours, we will set it free.
And to really grasp the full weight of a poem like that, it's crucial, as the source material emphasizes, to understand the historical foundation it's drawing from. The United States was founded on what the source calls this paradox of freedom built on bondage. You know, the Declaration of Independence proclaiming all men are created equal.
Right.
While explicitly excluding millions from that very promise, the poem isn't just reciting these historical facts, it's making us feel the enduring weight of that contradiction across time.
And the Constitution itself, written in the language of democracy, actually institutionalized racial hierarchy, defining enslaved people as 3/5 of a person. It's just a stark contradiction woven right into the nation's fabric from the absolute start, a legal framework that directly denied the humanity of an entire group of people.
Indeed. And American history is just filled with these kinds of paradoxes, isn't it? You think of Crispus Attucks, a Black man, the first known martyr of the American Revolution, fighting for a freedom he himself wouldn't fully get to experience. Or the Black soldiers who fought in literally every single American war, serving a nation that consistently denied them basic rights and dignity. The poem really channels this persistent, often unacknowledged struggle for belonging, for inclusion.
It's also so important to remember, as the source points out, that enslaved people literally built the wealth of the South. Their forced labor fueled the nation's economic rise. But then, after slavery, you have that brief period of Black political advancement, Reconstruction,
Crucial period.
which was then violently dismantled by white supremacy, paving the way for the brutal system of Jim Crow segregation, which legally enforced racial discrimination for decades.
Decades, yes. And even after fighting overseas in World War I and World War II, Black Americans came home to find themselves still treated as second-class citizens, facing horrors like lynching, redlining, that systemic denial of services based on race and location, and just persistent voter suppression. The civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s eventually forced the nation to confront these injustices, but as the source notes, that progress came at a terrible cost. People marching for justice were beaten, jailed, even assassinated.
And while those big legislative victories like the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 were incredibly hard won, systemic racism, as scholars like Michelle Alexander have shown, it just persisted. It morphed into things like mass incarceration, continued economic disparity, political disenfranchisement.
Exactly. And even today, in the 21st century, the source argues that the battle for racial justice continues. We see things like voter suppression laws, racial profiling, even attacks on teaching Black history in schools, revealing just how fragile that progress still remains. This whole historical context, it illuminates precisely why a poem like My Country 'Tis of Thee feels so vital, so necessary. It's like a living document of these ongoing struggles.
Which brings us right to the present day, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Why does this poem resonate so powerfully right now? What makes it feel so particularly relevant in our current moment?
Yeah, that really raises an important question, I think. The poem connects so deeply because we're living in a time when historical truth itself feels like it's under attack. The poem speaks directly to these current efforts we see to, say, ban books that confront America's racial past, or attempts to sanitize the horrors of slavery in school curricula, or efforts to silence discussions about systemic injustice altogether.
It's almost like, as the source suggests, the very act of telling the truth about America's history is met with this intense resistance, as if just acknowledging past wrongs somehow threatens the whole myth of American exceptionalism. But as the source really underscores, you can't just erase the past, and justice can't be indefinitely postponed.
And you see this connection reflected in movements for Black liberation all throughout history, right? From the Civil Rights Movement to the Black Lives Matter movement today, and the constant ongoing fight for voting rights. They all echo the same fundamental demand. America has to live up to the promises it actually wrote into its own laws.
Yeah.
This poem, it stands firmly in that tradition. It refuses to let America forget the sacrifices of all those people who fought for democracy, even while being denied its protections themselves.
And the source material leaves us with a very clear, very powerful statement about this poem's significance. It says, quote, "This is not just a poem, it is an act of resistance. It reminds us that history is not merely something to be remembered, but something to be reckoned with. Until that reckoning happens, the fight for justice continues."
A powerful concluding thought from the source.
It really is. So what does all this mean for us, for you listening? We've taken this deep dive into how just a single collection of poetry, and really focusing on one powerful poem within it, can actually transform our understanding of history, make it feel personal, urgent, undeniable. We've seen how My Country 'Tis of Thee in this context isn't just verse. It's presented as an act of resistance, demanding that reckoning with America's past and present.
And if we try to connect this to the bigger picture, it really highlights that the fight for truth and justice is, well, it's continuous, it's ongoing. This collection serves as a reminder that these stories of survival and resistance are absolutely crucial, especially when narratives have been deliberately distorted or silenced for so long. It's about the enduring power of voice, isn't it?
Absolutely. This deep dive, I think, has really shown us how vital it is to confront these uncomfortable truths and to acknowledge the full spectrum of our shared history, the good, the bad, the complicated. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does it truly mean to claim this ground, as the poem says, and to work to set this land free in our own time, not just for some, but genuinely for all, given this incredibly rich and complex historical context we've explored? How might you engage with history not just as a reader, maybe, but as an inheritor of all its profound complexities?